Hey, John here. This is just a really quick video. I want to make sure that everyone who wants to know can follow along with some subtle changes I've made to some of these GitHub repos in the recent weeks. As always, I want to say a big thanks to all my Patreons. They really do help. Every little bit helps, pay for the eval boards and stuff like that so that I can make, boards for, educational purposes for these videos that I may not have done just purely on my own hobbies. I may have skipped a few steps or something, just save a few bucks and time if I didn't want to try to convey anything to anybody else along the way. Anyway, again, a big thanks. Thank you very much. So, the changes here, all right? I just made a change to the README file in this website for the breakout board here that I designed. This particular board is to allow as many pins as possible of this FPGA to be pinned out to these headers so that we can do as much as we want with add-on boards and, breadboard, peripheral type things as possible, because a lot of times when you go out and buy an eval board, you end up in a situation where there's a lot of logic on the eval board that uses a lot of the FPGA pins, and that's not always what you want if you want to try and use as many pins as possible of the FPGA for your own project. So that's one of the reasons I built this board. The other reason is this was the first FPGA board I ever designed from scratch. This is actually a couple of years old at this point. I've been making revisions as I go. And I just wanted to find out if I could build one that actually worked. Because if you buy one that already works, you don't really know, if you made all the decisions yourself, if, you would have done it right. I also wanted very specifically to tinker around with this header here, which we'll talk about at great length at some other point in time, with regard to how we actually program the FPGA directly, in my case with a Raspberry Pi, and or program a flash ROM that plugs in down here, again, directly with a Raspberry Pi. So this was originally a sanity test kind of a project, but it kind of grew legs on its own and became useful over the course of time. So it's pretty useful, in my opinion, for illustrative purposes, various things. Okay, so that's why I'm focusing on this board in this series. Now, this is about some subtle updates. What are the updates? One, I added a link to this YouTube playlist. As you end up in the repo, you can't find the darn YouTube playlist. What was I thinking? Okay, so that's in there. Not worth, creating a whole new video on. What is worth pointing out in the level of a new video is this here. The link to the Raspberry Pi setup, GitHub repo right here. I have a video I recorded probably at this point a couple of years ago on how to set up a Raspberry Pi to match the way I set mine up when I use them in these videos that I've been producing over the years. Now, I changed this repo to match something that I did this summer, about a month ago. I switched over to using the 64-bit version of Raspberry Pi operating system, okay? Now, the reason I did this specifically is so that you can install the FPGA development toolchain on your Raspberry Pi without actually building it. And I had mentioned that process in a video a couple of steps earlier in this particular series on FPGAs. Building it on your own is a little annoying, and you don't need to do it if you got the 64-bit version. I used to do it because I don't think it was supported at all on the Raspberry Pi, and I had to do it a couple of years ago when I first started doing this sort of thing. And I never really noticed that there are no packages that will allow you to install it if you're on the 32-bit version. If you load the 64-bit version, and otherwise every single thing else in this website is the same and matches the video on how to do all this. In fact, here's the link here to the diff, I believe. there's the differences in here, okay? A little dialogue that I just verbally discussed. And instead of loading the light ARM hard float, we load the light ARM 64. That's it, okay? It's probably a newer version of the OS, a newer, but you get all that when you do your app, upgrade, update thing. Anyway, but the real thing is I'm now running the 64-bit Raspberry Pi OS. So that's the big news flash for this video. If you use the 64-bit version of the Raspberry Pi OS and you look at this website here, this Git repo, I should say, which I've shown earlier in this playlist, I made some changes in here because I've now validated that you can use the simple instructions, okay? If you've got the 64-bit version of the Raspberry Pi OS, you can simply do these commands and all is done and everything works, okay? I said earlier in this series that you'd need to do this from source on the Raspberry Pi. That actually is true if you want to run it on a 32-bit version, which is kind of hard to build. You have to, I don't think NextPNR even works on 32-bit mode. It's a big mess. So let's kick all that under the rug and say it never happened. Don't want to go there. Let's focus on FPGAs, not how to build stuff in 32-bit mode Linux, which it doesn't support it properly. Which is discussed down here. Feel free to knock yourself out. Have fun if you want. I do have to do this on Ubuntu 2004 LTS because they do not ship a set of these tools pre-built in the way that I want. They don't have the newer versions. At least last time I checked. Anyway, they did not. So anyway, that's what the main reason I wanted to make sure everybody understood what was going on here. These little subtle changes. So if you build a Raspberry Pi, you're trying to follow along, and you're having trouble getting things installed, go down to more example test programs down here, which is probably not the best name for that website, at least in this particular context. And note, I've made changes to this website down here, which talks, you just saw that. That's this one down here where I say, hey, look, you can just type these and get everything you need, which is what you're seeing me do in this series from this point on. And if you don't know how to set the 64-bit Raspberry Pi up, go down here and look and see the revised notes. Okay? So that's what I wanted to make sure everybody realized. Thank you very much for watching. Let's get everybody back in sync here so we can move on and actually do some real programming in Verilog and have some fun. Thanks again. I'm John Winans. See you next time.